This is a notes video of part 2 for section 5.4, synthetic division. So synthetic division is another division method, and what it does is it simplifies long division as long as your divisor is a linear expression. What you want to do is you want to set your expression or your divisor equal to 0 and solve for x. Okay, so I get -2. You can also think of it as, instead of saying x plus 2, we're going to use the -2. We're going to use the opposite sign. I'm going to write my divisor out here and put a little half box around it. Now I want to use the coefficient of all my terms, but I have to make sure that I have all terms. So I have an x to the third, x squared, x to the first, and my constant. If I didn't have my terms, I would need to use 0 as a placeholder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write my coefficients down right here. Okay, now I'm going to leave an empty line or an empty space, and I'm going to draw a line. Now, instead of doing subtraction like we did in long division, synthetic division only uses addition. So it might help you to remember this. Drop your mama. I know it sounds silly, but it works. The first thing you do is you drop your first term. Then you multiply that number that you dropped times your divisor. And then I add. Notice the addition, or the A for addition. I get -16. Now I'm going to multiply again. -16 times 2. I get 32. I'm going to add, and I have 83. And then I'm going to multiply again, and I get -166. Now the last number that we get when we do addition is always a remainder. So because I have a remainder other than 0, I know that x plus 2 does not is not a factor of x cubed minus 14x squared plus 51x minus 54. So my answer is just going to be x squared minus 16x plus 83. And if you remember, when you have a remainder, you write that remainder over your divisor. And there, I just did a much simpler method of division. One more thing, you may have noticed that with the polynomial we started off with was an x cubed. When you do long division, you always end up with one less degree. So I started with an x cubed, and my final answer was an x squared. Okay, so now let's practice synthetic division again. I see that my divisor is x minus 7, so I want to use a positive 7. And I want to use the coefficients from my polynomial here. But if you notice, we do not have an x squared term. So for that coefficient, we're going to use 0. Alright, we leave an empty space, and we draw our line. And if you remember, drop your mama. So it's going to stand for drop the first term, multiply that by our divisor. 1 times 7, we get 7. And now we add. Multiply again, and then add. Multiply again, and then add. And we see here now I have a remainder of 0. So I know that that polynomial factors, or x minus 7 is a factor of that polynomial. And my answer becomes x squared plus 7x minus 8. Okay, so now let's briefly talk about the remainder theorem, and we're going to cover this more in depth in class. It says if you divide a polynomial by x minus a, then the remainder is p of a. What that means is when I do division, either synthetic or long division, and I have a remainder, I get that same value as if I were to just evaluate my function for a. And the next example kind of goes over that a little bit. So example 4 says given that p of x equals x to the 5th minus 3x to the 4th minus 28x cubed plus 5x plus 20, what is p of negative 4? And we're going to show this using two methods, one with division and the second one is the remainder theorem. You can choose to do long division or you can do synthetic division. I'm going to go ahead and do synthetic division because we know that that is much quicker than long division. This is my divisor, negative 4. So I want to take that value exactly as it is. Let's make sure that we have all of our terms. I have a 1x to the 5th, negative 3 for x to the 4th, negative 28 for my x cubed. I do not have an x squared term, so make sure you fill in with 0. 5 for the x, and then my constant is 20. We're going to drop our mama. So I drop my 1. 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. I'm going to add those. I get negative 7. Negative 7 times negative 4 is positive 28. We add, we get 0. 0 times negative 4 is 0. Then I add, I get 0. Again, 0, negative 4 is 0. I have 5. 5 times negative 4 is negative 20. And I add, and I get a remainder of 0. So I see here my remainder is 0. Let's see what I get when I plug in negative 4 in for my function. So basically, I'm going to evaluate my function for negative 4. And you would type this in your calculator. If you don't remember, wherever there's an x, you're going to replace that with negative 4. Make sure you use parentheses. And when you hit enter, you'll see that you'll get 0. So if you notice that our remainder with synthetic division was 0, and when we evaluated, we got 0 as well. So there are two different ways of doing that.